Well, let's now talk about the tactics used by the Ukrainian riot police with Simon Foy. He's a retired senior officer from London's Metropolitan Police. Simon, what do you make of the methods used by the riot police there in Kiev?
Well, I mean, Phil, these are very difficult scenes, and obviously that situation has very quickly got out of control. What I thought was interesting was the way that it was described as being relatively peaceful one minute and then completely violent and disordered in another. I guess, really, this is the police somehow standing between the tension between letting people have lawful protest, which I think everybody wants to do, but the minute it starts becoming violent in the way that those protests have done, then they have no option than to react sometimes in the way they did.
Well, we, of course, saw those riots in London. The methods employed there by you, the police there in London, any different to the way that you would have approached it in Kiev?
Yes, the British police are fundamentally different in this, in that our tactics over here tend to be that wherever possible, we will get up as close to demonstrators in the first instance. And our experience over here is that if you're close to people, when they're in that peaceful mode, so to speak, then actually we find that that tends to inhibit the violent behaviour from attacking, and we can get to people pretty quickly if they're the ones that are starting the disturbance. And what police on the continent do, and I believe has been done here, is they always keep a certain distance between themselves and the rioters, probably for their own safety, but then to allow them to deploy, as they have done, other tactics. So I think the only difference you'd see is right at the beginning of this dispute, you might have seen British police tucked up quite close to the demonstrators in an effort to keep it from going down the violent route, which it's gone.
And you talk about that peaceful time, and yet the US and the EU have been very critical of the way the authorities have handled the situation. During that peaceful time, it looked as if the police were very patient. Did that actually give more time for the protesters to prepare? Indeed, we've even seen them building catapults. Was that valuable time lost?
Well, again, that's a really good word, patient. That's the sort of thing that police the world over like to be seen to do, because after all, people are legitimately protesting. Whatever the source of the protest is, people around the world should have a right to protest and make their views known peacefully. So if you like, if the police officers are actually taking their role in just making sure that that runs peacefully for as long as possible, then that's a good thing.
What about then, Simon, when we see the likes of Molotov cocktails, knives, indeed even gas being used to attack the riot police? What would the British authorities say to you in instructing you how to handle that sort of situation?
Well, you've seen, Phil, in this past week, actually, there's been a bit of a debate caused by the fact that my colleagues in the Metropolitan Police have actually made the suggestion to the Mayor of London and others, and supported by the Home Office, that we should have tactics like water cannon, because once that situation does get out of control like that, well, then there's two primary aims. The first aim is to restore peace quickly in whatever way you can, get the demonstrators moved away, broken up, arrested, whatever. And then the second primary means is to do so as safely as possible for the public first, but then for the officers second. So I think, in some ways, when you get that degree of violence being used against police officers, in many ways, it's not surprising that they have reacted as vigorously as they have. I mean, it's not very nice, it doesn't look very good, and indeed, a lot of police colleagues in Kiev have very unfortunately been injured as well.
Well, that's right. I was going to ask you that. I mean, you talk about the safety of the police officers, but they have incurred a lot of injuries. Are they well prepared? Are they well equipped? Does that sort of number of injuries surprise you?
Again, sadly, in intense violence like that, no, it doesn't surprise me, because when events with that degree of violence being shown towards the police happen, then, sadly and unfortunately and tragically, and again, all over the world, police officers will get hurt in those circumstances. Again, in the UK, we've made great efforts recently to provide our officers with appropriate equipment, protective helmets, fireproof overalls, and also we try and deploy them in methods where they're aware that they don't, for instance, go too far apart from each other, because lots of injuries occur when you're on the ground. So as far as possible, the police officers should try and keep to their feet and keep the crowd moving.
And does it surprise you that we have seen scenes of police officers in effect losing control and beating protesters?
Well, again, that's the unfortunate part about it, and that I think, in due course, I guess colleagues over there will, regret what's happened, and I'm sure there will be some sort of investigation what happened, and the powers and authorities in Ukraine will have to look at that very carefully. Don't underestimate at all the huge demands this places on people's professionalism.
I was going to ask you about the psychological pressures, Simon. What's going? Obviously, for anybody to be caught up in a riot must be terrifying. But what about the officers? What's going through their minds, having to deal with this?
Well, they're human beings at the end of the day. They are frightened, however well equipped they are, however well trained they are. This is a horrible analogy, but it's sort of combat in the field. We don't like making military analogy for policing because it's completely different from the way that the military operate. But actually, this is very frontline, face-to-face with some dangerous people, many of whom are actually intent on causing them harm. Now, sometimes in those circumstances, regretfully, police officers do lose control and actually do things that are, they not only they deeply regret, but are criminal in nature. Well, then I suppose what makes the difference between the police and the rioters is that the mark of a civilized society is that it looks at those responsible for protecting the peace, and then in due course will scrutinize what they did, and if they acted outside the law, well, they must be dealt with in those terms.
Well, what if the police lose faith in the authorities? I was talking to an analyst earlier from London. He was saying this isn't a revolution yet, but it would be if we saw signs of the police turning against the authorities. If they're under such pressure, could the actual protesters push them down that route? Is it looking that bad in Kiev, do you think? Well,
you're sort of way beyond my area of expertise there, but, let's put it from a UK point of view. Our job in policing in the United Kingdom is to keep the Queen's peace, and in doing so to police with the consent of communities, not with politicians, not with government, but we have to keep public consent. It's really, really important that you understand that about policing in the UK. I'm not sure whether it's the same in the Ukraine, but at some point, these police officers will be doing, if you like, what they're paid to do, but I'm sure they see as part of their duty. There's probably their city, they probably come from it, they probably don't like seeing it in the state that it's in. But of course, there will be all sorts of pressures which are way... All right. That the police have got anything to do with.
Just very briefly, please, very briefly here. Are the police in control of the situation, or could we see the military come in to help them?
I think they're in control. The last thing you want, believe you me, is having the military come in. You need to keep it and leave it to the police.
Simon Foy, former officer from London's Metropolitan Police, thank you very much indeed. Really interesting to talk to you on this. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.